Time. So my work looks at basically combating anti-Semitism, and I study different strategies like law, and I also study things like intergroup contact. That's my current work. In the research that I do here in Canada, um, I look at intergroup contact as a way to proactively and preventatively bring Jews and non-Jews together, form positive relations that are resilient against anti-Jewish ideas and attitudes. But what I uncovered in the work too, I argue, is a clue as to what might actually cause anti-Semitism to persist, and might be one of the mechanisms underneath its persistence. So, oh, just a sec. I have everybody's camera on and I can't see my work. There we go. So there we go. What I did was I looked at, or I did 54 qualitative interviews and analysis of those interviews with Jewish and non-Jewish individuals across Canada. I interviewed people in Ottawa, Ontario, Victoria, British Columbia, and Montreal, Quebec. Um, and what I found was that the finding
Yes.
I'll focus on in this paper is that programming that Jews and non-Jews participated in when they declared that anti-Semitism was low or non-existent almost always involved some kind of creative or experiential component that targeted people's emotions and feelings or beliefs. In other words, the activities that seemed to be most effective for combating anti-Semitism affected people's hearts before their minds. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And I argue this finding reveals a great deal about the nature of anti-Semitism and what maintains it or makes it attractive. Um, in other words, experiential or creative programming was essential to fostering and deepening the bonds and relational mechanisms such as empathy, love, respect, and compassion that were key between or in Jewish and non-Jewish relationships when anti-Semitism was either not present at all or very, very low. And this included various forms of anti-Semitism and related phenomena, which, like anti-Zionism or Israel criticism. But we're not going to talk about this today as to the line in the relationship with anti-Semitism. But just to give you a snapshot, and this was just, I combed through several of the interviews to pull the specific programming that over which my Jewish and non-Jewish participants formed relationships and reduced anti-Semitism. And these were just some of the kinds of programming that they took part in. Not everything that they took part in is listed in here, and some of these are just general events and programs, and other ones multiple people took part in different cities. Like there were many people who Shabbat dinners were a common activity that brought Jews and non-Jews together. Holiday meals, creative, like artistic programming, things like that. Um, and so you can just take a look quickly there. I also have some quotes later that'll help illustrate the mechanisms that I'm talking about. So one of the things that creative or experiential programming did was it helped people learn about Jews and it helped Jews learn about non-Jews and it increased their familiarity with each other. So social psychologists, or a lot of the social psychological work on combating prejudice, deals with the outcomes and mechanisms of why contact between competing outgroups has the greatest potential for reducing prejudice. So when I applied this in the context of anti-Semitism and Jewish and non-Jewish relationships, it was these programs that helped bring out people's feelings or created a positive emotion in the social situation and interaction that seemed to be the most important factor in the outcomes of reducing anti-Semitism, building relationships, empathy, etc. And so one of the most important cognitive outcomes, or sorry, two of the most important cognitive outcomes social psychologists note for intergroup contact is reducing outgroup anxiety. Sorry, I said two, I meant three. It's 2 in the morning, my apologies. And reducing outgroup anxiety, increasing empathy for members of outgroups, and also providing opportunities to learn and demystify people in different groups that are not your own. So the little formula I have here was a pretty common pattern with the participants I talked about that when they engaged in these kinds of activities with each other, where they could experience something together, and form a positive emotional resonance, not only with the activity, but with the people in which they were engaging with, be it Jews with non-Jews or vice versa. Um, they noted it often led to them retaining information about each other or learning about each other. And so, what was key here is that people's hearts had to be affected before their minds in order for learning about each other to take place and dispelling stereotypes and increasing knowledge about one another's backgrounds and identities. This is important because one of the strategies people often use to fight anti-Semitism are educational strategies, right? And so, I mean, you'll hear a lot about using the law or using education. And the problem is, I think it's a very basic question of anti-Semitism. We see rates of it increasing around the world, then what might be going on with the strategies we are currently using. And so, what might be happening that my research suggests is that in order for learning to be impactful and meaningful, people have to be actively engaging in something with Jews that brings out positive emotional resonance so that they can have a positive emotional association with Jews or Jews with non-Jews, which then increases the contact opportunities and exposure to each other, and thereby the opportunities to increase things like empathy, compassion, understanding, which were all key outcomes in when Jews and non-Jews interacted in spaces when anti-Semitism was low or non-existent. So this is just a quote from one of my participants in Ottawa, Suzanne. Suzanne worked for an organization here in Ottawa that the idea was that it provided housing for people who needed socially or subsidized housing, but the idea was that the programming that tenants were expected to engage in involved programming around diverse religious and ethnic identities. So the purpose was to bring people together in an open space where identities were openly talked about and engaged with. And so this was done through programming, often holiday celebrations, where tenants would come together for a Passover Seder. They had I think they've done activities, to break the fast for Eid or like a Christmas pageant. And so there were different activities for different religious communities of people who were tenants at the housing. But the idea was to foster positive relations in an environment where diversity was openly talked about. And Suzanne explains here that what was key with people or for the tenants when they learned about each other and why that learning stuck and why they were able to coexist peacefully in the housing, I guess I'll call it a housing project, but it's not really what it's called, but is because they could have positive experiences through activities that fostered that part of the brain, that foster feelings and emotions versus the side of the brain, I guess, where you're just dealing with logic and facts. Um, and this now, or so this gave participants in those programs a positive emotional connection to each other, including to Jews and Jewish holidays and parts or aspects of the Jewish world. Um, so what this implies, or what I argue this suggests about anti-Semitism, is that because these types of programs were so key, um, what might make anti-Semitism persist or make it attractive to people is that it plays on people's feelings. I've argued for a very long time that we may get farther instead of, asking people in surveys, what do you know about Jews or who are Jews? Instead, asking, what do you feel about Jews or how do Jews make you feel? Because it seems that the tropes and stereotypes we talk about when we talk about the different forms of anti-Semitism all play on moralistic or beliefs-based or feelings-based ideas. And that could also, in turn, reinforce why activities that are more creative or experiential in nature are key for um, allowing Jews and non-Jews to come together and form better relationships because they foster the kinds of um they address the kinds of cognitive and social mechanisms that may in fact make anti-Semitism attractive. This is another participant in Ottawa. This is not his name, this is his pseudonym. He went by Ignatius. He was a very strict Catholic, and we were talking about, he was talking about soccer. It's the World Cup right now. I don't really watch soccer, but many people do, so maybe this resonates. And I asked him why, if, he said if he was playing with his team, I guess from his church, and a Jewish team wanted to play, or a team from the Jewish community wanted to play, of course they would all play together. And I said, well, what would make you think of each other as human beings? Like, why would that build the bridges? And he said, it's because we're all just wearing a jersey. The idea being that the game of soccer elicits, first of all, feelings and emotions. People enjoy it. It brings out, I hope, a healthy competitiveness. But what it brings out is positive social traits and emotions on an equal plane where everybody is in the same boat with each other. Um, and what this also does is it creates a social environment in which people come together with the same purpose or the same goal. And so when they bond, they can then re or adjust their identities, not just to be Catholic or Jewish in this case, in this example, but they can be soccer players who happen to be Catholic and Jewish. And so they can relearn their identities in ways that are common or safe without negating the identities that might create tension or divides, such as religious or ethnic identity. And so that's what these types of programming or programs, I argue, that's what they can do as well, is they lower the stakes for interaction and relationship building, which I have found is key to reducing anti-Semitism amongst non-Jews. Um, Another example about volunteering from a participant in Montreal, Monica. The idea being that when you're volunteering, it's like soccer. When you come together for a common community cause, which was another type of programming that brought Jews and non-Jews together, you'll see this commonly in interfaith programming. Oh, I see my warning. Thank you. Um, the idea is that you are coming together and you're not, again, eliminating the identities that might carry tension, like religious or ethnic identities, but you are now recategorizing, that's the technical term for it in social psychology. You are recategorizing your identities to first build relationships of safety and trust on and around projects or activities that you have in common, such as volunteering for some of the projects people volunteer for. There was a sock drive for people who were out on the streets in Victoria, in British Columbia. There were food drives people talked about where they would, like interfaith food drives for people of different religious communities, Jewish, non-Jewish, would come together to collect food for those in need in their broader community, where whatever city they were living in. So, a one in Ottawa as well was a blood drive that brought people together. It was specifically an interfaith blood drive. The idea being that we all are humans. We all have, whether you're O positive, A negative, B positive, whatever your blood type is, we all have blood. We all need blood and the components in the blood. And so the idea was to come together and do something, give to the Canadian Blood Services, who are always in need of this type of resource, and to come together and learn that, like, you can be Jewish, you can be Muslim, you can be Christian, but we are all people donating blood for a common cause, and that's an identity we can share. And then people learn about each other in contexts where they are seeing people, oh, well, that's a person who's Jewish. I might have had a negative interpretation, but they're here being compassionate, raising money for food, a sock drive, donating blood. Okay, like that's a positive association I can now put onto someone who's Jewish. And the potential is, I'm not saying this is the case in every, I mean, this is very idealistic, but the idea is that over time, the more consistent these activities and exposures are, the more people can relearn about outgroups in positive contexts as well. And so it brings safety and trust into relationships, and it helps reduce anxiety towards outgroups, which again, social psychologists argue is one of the key outcomes that predicts prejudice reduction when you use intergroup contact or contact between competing outgroups to reduce, yeah, prejudice. Um, Oh, I think that was the last slide. So these are just what this does. Again, in conclusion, I argue is it suggests what might be driving anti-Semitism. Why is this different than other forms of hate? because when I looked at it in the context of anti-Semitism, it wasn't learning about facts. It wasn't someone telling you, well, Jews are good. Israel, these are facts about Israel to counter kind of Israel criticism and anti-Zionism. Well, Jews didn't kill Christ. Jews this and that. Like take any trope or stereotype you want. What was key was the interaction and the emotions that the interactions elicited in participants. And that's what predicted their ability to retain learning about Jews that challenged their perceptions about Jews. And again, for Jews about non-Jews, because to create exposure opportunities that bring Jews and non-Jews together, to have Jews willingly participate in these moments and these interactions and activities where non-Jews can indeed learn about Jews in a safe and trusting environment. Jews have to be willing to engage as well, and that was also important. So these types of activities lower the stakes. They arguably address the cognitive and social mechanisms that seem to be important in interactions that involve anti-Semitism reduction and Jews. And so that's just one finding that I found that I think was really important as we look at strategies for combating anti-Semitism. We need to look at what are we actually combating under the surface. And so this is sort of new, this idea, I think, but in the world of anti-Semitism studies. But um, this is what I am presenting about
Okay.
this
Thank
morning.
you. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I will